and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are at pedalshift.net/109, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or call the voicemail hotline 202-930-1109, and you can check the Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pedalshift Project. I am Tim Mooney, your host for this particular episode, and probably for future ones, and definitely for all the past ones. I'm really excited to bring this interview with Russ Roca from the Path Less Pedaled. It was a fantastic opportunity to chat up bicycle touring and Bromptons and bike travel and all the different types of stuff that he does over at Path Less Pedaled. So I'm really excited to get to that in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to say thank you to everybody who turned out for last week's Pedalshift Live. It was totally fun, and I think based on the feedback that I got, we'll definitely do another one. I mean, people were asking for a new one like at the end of that one, so that worked out really, really well. I'm really excited to do another one, probably sometime early spring, April-ish, I'm thinking. But what you can do to help me out with all of this is I want you to go to pedalshift.net/live. I'm going to have a really, really short survey because what I'd like to do is get your feedback and your thoughts on the topic to cover and maybe some other ideas that you might have on how to make the whole experience more fun, better, whatever. So it's super short. Just go over there, pedalshift.net/live. It's like a Google form kind of thing, super quick, and your input would be really, really helpful to making it a better experience for the next time. And like I said, if this is cool and you all like it, we'll keep doing it. So look for that in early April. I'll have dates out there as soon as I have that all set in my calendar. Quick little bit of programming note here on next week's show, episode 110 of the Pedalshift Project. We're going to continue our beginners series, checking in with James in New York. Plus, we'll have an update on the Puget Sound Brompton tour that I unveiled last week. In fact, at about the time that number 110 hits the pods, I will be hopefully sound asleep in my tent within a stone's throw of the sound itself, resting up for my first day of riding. So that's super exciting. I'll be taking that following week off as the off week for the month, and then I'll be back for 111 in about, what would that be? Late March. So that's the programming schedule for the next few weeks. Super excited to be sharing all of this kind of stuff with you, and looking forward to getting out on the bike again. It's going to be awesome. Russ Roca is one half of the Path Less Pedaled, one of my favorite resources for bicycle travel. Since the early aughts, as Russ calls them, he has used photography, video, writing, whatever, to advocate the joys of bicycle travel. Whether it's extended bike tours across the US and New Zealand, to making Bromptons work for bicycle touring, to working with state and local agencies to promote bicycle travel, Russ has been a real leader in the field, and I'm really excited to bring this chat to you on the Pedalshift Project. So without further ado, here's Russ. I am joined here on the Pedalshift Project with Russ Roca from the Path Less Pedaled. Russ, thanks for joining us on the Pedalshift Project.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been enjoying your podcast immensely, so I'm stoked to be on the show.
Well, I have to say, I've been enjoying all of the stuff that you've been doing for years and your brand new podcast. I definitely want to talk about that later on. But you are one of the pioneers in sort of like getting into the social media aspects of bicycle touring. And I wanted to really kind of take a deep dive into all of that. But first, I wanted to kind of get a little bit of background for you. In 2009, you and your partner, Laura Crawford, sold your stuff. You began a 3-year bicycle touring journey in the US and New Zealand. Bring us all the way back then. And how did you get, from your life before that big tour to making that big leap? What was the decision-making process for that?
It's interesting. I think a lot of bike blogs and bike personalities started in that like mid 2000s, and we were part of that kind of just generation. Early bike bloggers, and that's when I discovered bike commuting in Los Angeles. And slowly we started doing overnight tours. We got exposed to Rivendell and really latched on to that idea. And then one time in like 2008, we did a 2-week tour in Joshua Tree And afterwards, we were like, whoa, this is so much fun. I wonder what would happen if we didn't go back home. And then 2009 happened, and then we saw the big economic downturn, right? Laura caught wind that, that there's going to be some organizational reshuffling in where she worked. And at the time I was doing photography, so I just kind of kept booking shoots, saving. And once she got the final word that she was going to get laid off, I kind of just set things in motion, put up the website, and decided that this is as good a time as any, that we weren't going to miss out on any big economic boom. So this it was a good time to learn how to live light. And what was funny was like a lot of people did that year. Like I think we rode a portion of the Pacific coast, and we met so many people. One guy who's a programmer from Florida biked to Alaska, was going down to Argentina. Lots of people had that same experience that year.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I think that in times of stress in our country, art and creativity really takes a big uptick. And so, yeah, you saw a lot of really cool stuff come out of that time. At what point, it sounds like you had kind of an idea that it was going to be happening, and had a little bit of a plan going into it. Did you have what the Path Less Pedaled was all kind of figured out before you kind of went tires to the road, or did this just sort of develop as you went?
It was all really organic. Like, I think probably from the moment that we committed to when we left was a span of like 4 months, which is, I think, in retrospect, the best way to do it. Because if you have too much time to think about it, there's lots of ways to talk your way out of it. But because since the turnaround time was so quick, we just got rid of everything, didn't really think about it. And originally, it just began as a personal blog, to kind of document the adventure for ourselves. We had no intentions of turning into a brand, a business, and all these other things that it's become since then. So it was really just we're doing this thing, and I want to remember it and record it for myself. And it was kind of early days. There was, I believe, a crazy guy on the bike. There was maybe a couple of other bike tourists blogging about the experience, but nothing to the scale that we see today. So I feel like we were able to kind of capture a lot of that early market where people were interested in it.
What was the production level like back then? Obviously technology has really increased a lot. What was sort of your gear going out? Was it just iPhone and a dream, or it was heavy? Okay, yeah. Tell us about what kind of gear you were bringing then.
I think we both had a really romantic notion that we'd be able to work on the road. So at the time, Laura was making head badges and jewelry. So she carried a bag of hammers and silver and saws and everything. And I had this notion that, I do food photography and portraits, and that's something that every, town needs. So I actually traveled with 2 light stands, a softbox, I had a big laptop computer, DSLR, a bevy of lenses, strobes, umbrellas. So it was not ultralight by any means. And partly the technology wasn't there, the whole mirrorless camera, hybrid cameras that did both video and stills really well didn't exist. So I was using kind of the tools at the time, and also the mediums of the time. I think maybe some people were vlogging back then or creating video content, but not enough. So definitely over the years, I think the technology and the ways that we tell stories has changed given what's available.
Did you have any, shall we say, camera loss during that time? Because there's one thing that I've learned is that the vibration on the road can really mess up your gear. Did you have any early losses?
Actually, everything held up surprisingly well. I padded everything in lots of sweaters and shirts. So that did well. Ironically, one of the things that I did carry with me was a field recorder and a shotgun mic. Back then I had this notion of doing, stills with audio underneath it. So like an audio slideshow. So basically a podcast with still images. But I couldn't quite wrap my head around audio editing back then. So at some point I ditched that and just went for the photography and the writing. And it's funny to rediscover that in a way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. How do you think that your writing and your video and your photography work has evolved since you first started? Has the road sort of and all these trips informed how you approach all of this?
Yeah. So I think initially we focused a lot on ourselves and what we were thinking. But I feel like the longer that we were on the road, I was more interested in the stories of other people and how that all tied together. So there's definitely a shifting of the lens from, us complaining about the weather, not having food, to kind of trying to capture the stories of people we interacted with. And I'm totally glad we did that, because that's almost, 8 years ago. And the things that I remember most are those human interactions rather than like the scenery and, it was cold at night. So I think definitely like the longer time we spent on the road, the more we appreciated those human interaction.
Over the years, you've built Pathless Pedaled into a really great resource for bicycle travel. You've partnered with state tourism boards, for example, and a bunch of different companies and stuff like that. But I wanted to focus a little bit on sort of these broad-based state tourism boards and other groups like that. How do you find working with those big tent organizations that are they're interested in bike tourism? Otherwise, I wouldn't hire you guys. But it's probably a really small overall part of their mission. How have you found kind of that balance with them?
I think our most successful partnership has been with Travel Oregon around the Oregon Scenic Bikeways. And we've worked with other state level organizations like Idaho and Iowa, a little bit with Mississippi. And for like, those were long courtships. Like, I feel like most state tourism organizations, view cycling as a niche, of varying degrees. But it's usually through a lot of emails, or we meet these people in conferences, and we're constantly making the case. We do a lot of speaking at both bike summits and tourism conferences. So we kind of have to do a lot of convincing. But at the same time, they do, all these destinations see bicycling as an important kind of market segment to grow. I mean, they realize that people are biking in their state, their region, that these are great travelers to have because, they eat a lot, they drink a lot, and they behave. They're pretty tired at the end of the day. And also, for a lot of these destinations, especially ones with lots of rural areas, like, they don't have to develop a lot. It's different from like developing, let's say, a trail of golf courses. You have to build that physical infrastructure. But for bicycling, you really just need basic hospitality. Actually, the fewer kind of things you have, the better, because there's generally less traffic. So as long as there's decent roads to ride, paved, gravel, or trail, and there's a place to stay and there's a place to eat, then almost any destination can kind of frame itself as a bicycling destination. I mean, there's leveling degrees of success, but I think most destinations we've interacted with understand that yes, they could do it. That it's something that they should explore in the future.
Have you run into any resistance from any of these types of organizations that you've chatted with? I mean, obviously, if you work with them, they're open to bicycle tourism and whatnot, but I'm curious what your strategies have been for talking to folks that are a little bit more resistant to the idea, to the economics behind it, things like that.
What's interesting is, like, I actually find the tourism industry a lot more open-minded in many ways than traditional bike advocates. I feel like when we do speak at conferences, we have to do a lot more selling to what I'd consider traditional bike advocates in that space rather than tourism people, because they're always looking for the next trend, a new way to get people into their area. So you seem fairly open-minded. We can show them, many states have different studies, so we'll usually give that in the presentation. And one thing that we've been doing a lot the last 8 years is recording lots of interviews. So we'll record, people that were skeptical about bike tourism, but then started the business along the trail and saw how it was a big economic boom. We've interviewed, city managers that in the Midwest that have embraced gravel grinding, but were first kind of wary, but then saw like this huge event brings people, to these places that people would just fly over, but now are visiting on purpose and even year round. So we have all these interviews. And just we present lots of good case studies.
Exactly. That seems like a good way to do it.
Yeah, it's one thing for us to say, yeah, you should get into bike tourism because it's awesome. But then it's another thing to have like a primary source of someone else saying, yes, I was kind of on the fence, but it's actually a thing and it's benefiting me and the community.
Do you find that your role as an advocate for bike travel, bike tourism has changed over the years? Has there been a different kind of focus in recent years than compared to when you started? Because it feels like we're in the middle of some kind of a change. I'm not sure if I can put my finger on what that is, but it feels like something's happening.
Yeah. Early on, like I think our mission, if we had a mission, was to get individuals excited about bike travel. But then I feel like there's a lot of people doing that now. Like there's, we don't need to fill that segment. But, there's still work in kind of working with the destinations to get them ready to receive all these people that are stoked on bike travel. So that's where we've kind of shifted our efforts. In terms of kind of specific things like, gravel is big, off-road bicycle touring, bike packing, whatever you want to call it. There's a big emphasis on that at the moment. But I also think like another thing we'll see in, that's always existed, but we'll probably see more of is kind of just like destination-based cycling. So, base camping at one place and doing loops. You might do a paved route one day and then the gravel loop the other day. So what that looks like in terms of bicycle touring. Because I feel like over the years, like the kind of bike travel we like to do has changed. We used to like to do the long distance kind of self-supported, but then now we're actually all about like these small regional explorations because you get to really dig your teeth into a place and get a sense of the area.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the evolution of even just the bikes that you've ridden in the past. And actually, maybe I'll just skip ahead because I've been dying to talk Bromptons with you for, forever. So let's get into a little bit about Bromptons. I mean, people who listen to my show know I'm a full believer in touring on Bromptons and the capabilities of the bikes. In fact, I'm going to announce on the live show tomorrow as we record that I'm going to be doing a Puget Sound little mini adventure a few days after this podcast gets cast out to the world. But back in 2011, you and Laura did a big tour on Bromptons and ended up writing the Unauthorized Brompton Touring Guide, which is actually pretty cool. I'm curious, like, what got you directed towards Bromptons, and because it doesn't seem like you are riding them as much, have you become less enamored with it as a touring vehicle, or is it just you're more interested in some of these rides that you just described, the kind of hyper-local ones where maybe a Brompton wouldn't be so great, like, say, on gravel?
Yeah, so we got interested in Bromptons at the end of our kind of tour with the long-haul truckers because we found ourselves using transit a lot, hopping on the Amtrak or kind of a regional train, and with a large size bike with a traditional loading set, it just became like a pain in the butt. So we're like, there's got to be a better way. And then we had a friend that had toured in Brompton. I was like, I never really took it seriously until we had all these terrible train experiences. And then I started looking at the gearing, and I was like, you can get actually pretty close to like, a triple. Like if you gear it right and you pack less, like broad picture gear range wouldn't be too dissimilar. And also, at that time we wanted to pack lighter, and the Brompton definitely has like, I feel like, a more strict weight limit. But also, one of the things that we've always fought against is kind of, existential gear less. Like, what do you actually need to tour? And I thought, touring the Brompton with just 6 speeds and these like unlikely small tires would be a perfect example of like, you can actually tour on any bike. So it became kind of, we wanted to prove it to ourselves, but also show other people that, any bike is, can be an adventure bike, given, the right circumstances. And we really wanted to strip the focus away from the gear specifically to storytelling and just having fun on the bike. So we did that. We toured initially from like Portland to, I think we started in Bend, went up to Glacier, then went overseas to New Zealand for 3 months and toured on Brompton. And at the end of that, wrote the Unauthorized Brompton Touring Guide, which was fun. And it is unauthorized because during that time we were in contact with Brompton engineers, and they're like, I don't know about that.
That's funny. I'm curious. I've been giving you guys credit for the backpack hack. Was that your idea, or did you find that out from some other folks?
I think when we were doing research, I saw some people kind of do that, but it was kind of, it was like early days, on Flickr, like you kind of saw a hint of it, but no one was really explaining it well. So we knew that it could be done, and then just had to figure out a way like where it makes sense. So how do you actually attach the dowel to the back of the saddle? And, how do you secure the backpack after it's on there? So we did see other people do it before, but I think like, we made videos about it and clearly the book about it. So it kind of spread that message a lot better.
Well, I have to tell you, the video that you did, I don't know if you get like 10,000 hits a day off of this thing, but you should because it really made a huge difference for me to be able to kind of wrap my head around how to get a backpack to work on the rear rack. So thank you. I've been meaning to say that for a very long time. I'm curious because I get this all the time when I'm riding with my touring setup, which is not dissimilar to what you guys did. Did you get like everybody asking you if you were going to be popping a wheelie going up hills? Because literally every day I get that when I'm riding on the touring setup. And I don't know why it annoys me so much, but for some reason it doesn't. I'm curious if you had the same experience.
We didn't get that so much as we did like, oh, do you have to pedal faster because the wheels are smaller? Or if whenever, we didn't have stuff on the bike, people just would like lift it up to see if it was like any lighter than a regular bike. But yeah, definitely it raised a lot of eyebrows and questions. It was cool. It was cool to show people what's possible.
Yeah. And that was my favorite part too, was just, I didn't mess around. I went straight to Big Sur the first time I did it. And, to be able to take those hills and to climb those climbs with that little clown bike, as I affectionately call it, it was really exciting. And, the setup that you guys talk about in your book just really worked really well. So that's why I want to plug the hell out of that thing, because it really does a nice job of giving you the option to have a not insignificant amount of stuff. I think you're right. You have to pare your gear down, but I'm carrying a full size tent. I'm carrying all of my sleeping kits and everything like that. It's pretty remarkable what you can get on that bike, especially if you can do something on the front with that luggage block as well.
Yeah, I loved it. I love what I still really love about touring with the Brompton is it lets you skip all the crappy parts.
Yes.
By using transit, and in particular places that aren't outfitted to carry full-size bikes. So in New Zealand, there's some great areas of riding, but there's also lots of terrible areas. But they had all these tourist buses that could kind of teleport you to the better riding areas. But they didn't have bike racks. But because we could fold the Brompton up and toss it below in the luggage compartment, we could skip those crappy parts and get straight to the good parts.
Did you ever run into any situations where there were bike racks on the front of the bus and the driver made you put it on the front rack?
Yeah, we did in New Zealand. Like, he tried really hard. You're like, dude, it's not going to work. Like, the wheelbase is too short.
It's too short.
It's just, it's going to fall off the front. And it took some convincing. And I think we actually had to like just show how absurd it would be. Like, we could toss it in the back.
Yeah. Pretend it's a stroller, sir or ma'am.
Yeah. I also feel like that might have happened once in Oregon, taking the bus to Tillamook. Like, maybe they wanted us to put in the no. It was a bus to Bend from Portland. They actually were really anal about us taking the Brompton. They wanted us to put it in the full size bike box, which was absurd.
I've heard that the Bend to Portland bus is extra strict, whereas the Tillamook folks, they're like, third bike, sure, throw it in the back, kind of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, that bus is not my favorite. Like, we've worked on them. We tried to get Travel Oregon and put some pressure on them. But the thing is, like, they see themselves as a airport shuttle,
right?
For people going from Bend to Portland, and less like, something for tourists. So.
That is a missed opportunity right there, right? You had mentioned storytelling earlier in our chat, and I think that's one of the things that makes your work so much more dynamic, is to weave in elements of storytelling. When you are going off on any of these types of trips, whether it's when you're hired for or one that you're doing on your own, do you go in with an idea on how to weave in a story, or do you mostly let it come to you through the lens as you go along?
It's shifted, I think, initially over time. I think initially, like, I was like, oh, we're just film what happens and, make a story out of it. But that's not very conducive to good storytelling sometimes. So usually when we go out on a trip, I'll have like a rough narrative arc, and, story has a beginning, middle, and an end. So definitely, film a piece of camera to set it up. Like, what's the beginning? What's the purpose? Like, I'm not a fan of those videos that you see that are kind of rambly and don't have a purpose. So I like to state that right up front. Okay, we're going to take Amtrak. We're going to ride Going to the Sun Road. So in that way, it's planned. But I do leave it open to kind of film those interactions, but all the while, like, kind of self-editing in my head for the narrative arc. And definitely at the end, put a cap on it, just so that there's that sense of closure. So it's a balance of both. Like, some video kind of framing the experience so the viewer knows what to expect. Being open to what the experience happens in the middle, but then also like closing it off at the end.
Cool. Have you ever thought about doing any kind of larger scale projects like full documentaries or anything like that? Because I feel like that you're more than equipped to be able to do such things.
I have, but not on our personal tours. Like if we were to do one, we've had like a documentary project in mind for a very long time, trying to pitch it to various people like Adventure Cycling and People for Bikes, but no one's really bitten. But it would be about this idea of rural economic development and bikes through bike travel. So telling that story of, what the, ACA routes have done, what certain bikepacking routes have done, what gravel rides have done to these rural areas that were maybe kind of skeptical of bikes, maybe slightly anti-bike, but then after being exposed to cyclists, have changed their minds and have become welcoming of bikes. So I feel like, that's where a lot of maybe resistance comes from. And we need those voices to be at least supportive of bikes. And no one's really capturing that. And I think that's kind of, a lot of traditional bike advocacy focuses on kind of dense urban centers because that's where, bike commuting makes sense. But rural areas can also benefit from cycling. It's completely different concerns. And we have to address those and kind of work that into the message as well.
Yeah.
So that would be, a documentary project we want to do. For us, for our travels, I'm kind of actually content with short form, just like kind of snack size adventures. Just because I feel like, you go too long on any kind of bike travel narrative, it ends up being, complaining about the weather or a hill or something, rather than like kind of interesting, I don't know, like interactions.
Yeah, it's funny because, in order to have a good dramatic story arc, hero's journey, Chekhov's bike, I guess we'll call it, it's sort of like you don't know you're always going to have that kind of stuff. So, a lot of bike tours are frankly just a lot of cycling and it's beginning and end and that's about it. So you just never know. But when you do get those kind of moments, it's always kind of fun to be documenting them.
I think it's easier to have like a more sharply focused story in a smaller trip, like either, riding around the route, or, riding to a particular destination, then you can kind of wrap your head around, what that narrative would be rather than something so long and open-ended.
I think I have seen some drone footage in some of your stuff. Have you been getting into drones? What do you think about, what are you using these days? And what do you think about it in the realm of using it to document a bike tour, whether kind of at the scale that you guys do it or, somebody out there who's just like, hey, I'd like to send a cool shot of me biking on this trail back home.
I really have mixed feelings about drones.
I can imagine.
We have them and we use them, but I was kind of dragged into using them because I feel like they're kind of crutches for storytelling. They're good, like eye candy to suck a viewer in, but I feel like they tend to be overused and they don't really add to the narrative. Like you can maybe use it in the beginning to have an establishing shot, maybe at, some kind of climax when you hit a peak. But then that's all I don't want, a drone shot of you eating something or. So like I use it, but I use it sparingly. We have we have two drones, one for paid work, which is a Phantom 4. And then for our personal stuff, we'll use the Spark, the little small one. You get about 11 minutes of flight time per battery. So, you can you have to be really purposeful about how you use it. I think it's a tool. I think it gets overused. Actually, a lot of our recent vlogs, I've just been using a GoPro because I really wanted to strip away like, all the technology and see if I can just get away with like pure narrative and what that would look like. But depending on the ride or what we're doing, I'll use a drone, but it's not my primary tool.
I feel like a lot of people are using the drones because they're like, if I hauled this thing all the way out here, I am going to use it. I'm going to drain every ounce, every last electron out of that battery and get tons of shots. So maybe that's it.
Yeah. It's a quick, well, I would say quick. It's a accessible way to increase the production value of any video. Like I feel like it's like, boom. Oh, it's cool looking. But I feel like many bike videos kind of over rely on the drone, and like many, I'm a big consumer of bike video media, both as like a creator and just like a critic. And, there a lot of videos have no story. It's like beautiful footage and music, which is cool to watch, but then it feels like empty calories after a while. It's like you're not giving me any beta or information or sucking me in. You're kind of feeding the eyes, but not, I don't know, the soul.
Yeah. You got to have something to say, and you're communicating. It's sort of be like doing a podcast and just sort of reading from a phone book. You want to be able to at least communicate something. I want to talk a little bit about relationships, because the kind of preamble to this is I think I've talked about this on the pod. I spent about 3 months in an RV for my girlfriend's book tour a few years ago, and it was 19,000 miles. And I found the dynamics of traveling in that small space really eye-opening. She does not bike tour. So you, however, have ridden with your partner for a lot longer than that. And I'm curious what kind of advice or insight that you've gotten over the years traveling with Laura, and advice for folks who are going to be traveling with their partners on bike tour, because I have a ton of listeners who have that exact dynamic.
Not only did we travel together, but we've operated Path Less Pedaled as a business together pretty closely. And I mean, one of the first things to go is privacy. So I think acknowledging that although you love each other, it's okay to have like quiet downtime at the end of the day. You don't have to have that intense kind of conversation all the time, because you're seeing the same thing. So that was a weird thing to be so close, but then actually talk less sometimes at the end of the day. But realizing that that's okay, because we've had so many shared experiences. So that, and I think early on we really kind of figured out what our individual strengths were. So there was like a little bit of a division of labor, like, okay, I would do these tasks and Laura would do these tasks, and then kind of respecting those. So I think those would be like understanding that you're not going to be talking all the time, and that's okay, is like a big part of it.
I totally hear you. And that's almost exactly what I would say. I'm the extrovert of our relationship, and she's the introvert. And one thing that I had to learn was that having that quiet time at the end of the day, it wasn't her being mad at me. That wasn't anything like that. Yeah. That was just reality, and just how we operate differently, even though we've been together for 14 years now. So it's been a while. Do you like traveling solo? Do you find that scratches an itch that's different than traveling with Laura?
Don't
worry, nobody's listening to this.
I mean, I feel like I like traveling with Laura the best, because when I travel solo, I'm always thinking, oh, Laura would really dig this. Yeah. So it almost kind of defeats the purpose, because I'm always like filtering it, the experience through my eyes of like, oh, I want to bring Laura back here. So I think I'll do a solo trip, but it somehow feels less fun for me.
Is she, you've gotten into fishing, or at least maybe you've always been into fishing, but at least I've been noticing it more in the last couple of years or so. Is she as into fishing as you are, or is that sort of your thing?
No, she's gotten into fishing the last couple of years. Like at first it was, for a long time, it was just my thing. And then we went fishing on the Deschutes River once during one of the big, famous fly hatches. And, she's kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to catch anything. And then she got a fish.
Of course.
And that kind of changed the game. And like, since then she's been really into it. So it's been like an authentic, like, incorporation into our lives. And now we live in Montana. There's literally like a trout creek about a block and a half away.
Oh, wow.
So we can scratch that itch, when the weather's nice or when the creek's open.
Oh, that's fantastic. Is there any place where that you've got your eye on from a fishing standpoint that you want to get to by bike that you haven't done yet?
There's a lot of undiscovered, or for us, like undiscovered territory in like Montana. I mean, there's just so many good rivers here. So piecing those together, a lot of stuff in Idaho. Mm-hmm. We've just barely scratched the surface. There's this route called the Bitter Route 300 that uses the Trail of the Quarter Lanes and connects to gravel roads. And a lot of that, is surrounded by awesome fishing. So I think that's one of the next trips that we're going to plan on doing.
Oh, that sounds awesome. It sounds really good. We kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but to kind of close things out, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the future of bike tourism and what it's looking like from your vantage point, and also what the Path Less Pedaled is going to do in reaction to all of that. Because I feel like that, as you talked about, the Path Less Pedaled has evolved over time. How is that going to be happening vis-a-vis the changes that you foresee with bike tourism?
So when I talk about bike tours, I'm definitely thinking about like working with destinations and everything, and less about the individual experience of traveling by bike. I think we're going to still see more destinations get on board. For a while, like, Travel Oregon or the state of Oregon was really carrying that flag really high, and lots of states look up to Oregon. And now that they've kind of maybe not been as vocal and visible, some destinations are kind of might be like wait and see to see what's happening next. But there's still many that are into it. I think probably the biggest opportunity is in off-road destination bicycling. So for areas to realize that, yes, gravel grinding is a thing, maybe we should create some events, but beyond the events, kind of somehow institutionalizing these routes. So for example, I'm actually working on another podcast that's different from the one that we have, and it's going to focus specifically on the concept of bike tourism. So one episode is all gravel rides. So I just interviewed the folks that do Dirty Kansas, the event promoters and the city officials, and the same thing for Barrie-Roubaix and the event organizers and the city officials to kind of look at this synergy. And if you look at an event like Barrie-Roubaix, it's fascinating because it's a small town, Hastings, Michigan. They have this event, biggest gravel ride in the States, and the city went the step further to actually permanently sign those gravel routes. I mean, to my knowledge, this is like the first in the country, for municipality to see, the value of this off-road cycling or off-pavement cycling event, and kind of be really supportive of signing it year-round. And that's what they're seeing. They're seeing people come do the event during the weekend, but then also ride it year-round, and it's become like a destination. So I think we'll see more of that in varying degrees. But that's a fascinating story. I mean, it'll be out on that's the first podcast episode I'm going to be working on for the bike tourism specific one. So that'll be one trend. And for us, it's we're always morphing. Again, it started as a personal blog, then working with destinations, and then some influencer work. So depending on the current demand, we're staying pretty flexible. Just finger on the pulse, like trying to anticipate trends and fill those gaps.
Well, you have been doing that for years and putting out such great stuff. You can check Russ's stuff out at pathlesspedaled.com. The YouTube channel, it's Pathless Pedaled, I assume, as well.
If you search for Pathless Pedal on YouTube, it should show up.
It should. And most importantly, perhaps, you have joined the ranks of podcasting, and it is a great listen. So go check that out on your favorite podcast app. I think you're on all the SoundClouds and the Stitchers and all that other stuff as well. That's the Pathless Pedal podcast. Russ, thanks so much for joining the Pedalshift Project.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That was such a good time chatting with Russ. It's been something I've really wanted to do for a while. So big thanks to Russ for coming on the show to chat up bike travel. A quick little bonus for you. We did this as a video as well. So if you want to watch some more thrilling mic technique, as I know you all do, go to the Pedalshift YouTube channel. You can just go to YouTube, type in Pedalshift, and you can check it all out. While you're there, subscribe, like everything in sight, and then do the exact same thing for the Pathless Pedaled, because it is a really, really great, I would say, perhaps required for any of you who are interested in bicycle travel at all, no matter how you do it, bike packing, gravel, traditional kind of panniers, Bromptons, all of it. They cover so much over there at Pathless Pedaled. You can also check out Russ at pathlesspedaled.com, the aforementioned YouTube channel, and the podcast is brand new in the last couple of months, and I would definitely encourage you to check that out if you're into these bikey podcasts. Love them. He's got interviews with all sorts of bicycle-oriented people. My favorite one recently was with Lael Wilcox at the end of January. It was really great, and I learned a lot about all of her adventures. So go check that all out. And we like to end off the show, as always, with a big thank you to the supporters of the show, who are members of the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help maintain Pedalshift as an independent, listener-supported voice while expanding the offerings. We're talking $1, $2, $5 a month. Helps with the cost of hosting the podcast and the website. You can do it for a bit. and cancel anytime. One-shot support is welcome as well. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittis, Thomas Skadow, Seth Krieger, Mark Olo, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadas, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Ruth Divorcey, Michelle Miller, Matthew Lewis, Michael Baker, Billy Crafton, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Matt Perry, Danielle Jepson, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Bobby Rupel, Roy Everett, Greg Braithwaite, John Mayer, William Cairns, Sandy Pizzio, and thank you all to all past and anonymous donors for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.